BBC4 Collections, specially chosen programmes from the BBC archive. For this collection, Max Hastings has selected interviews with Great War veterans filmed in the 1960s. More programmes on this theme and other BBC4 collections are available on BBC iPlayer.
I started at the mill when I was 13 years of age, learning to be a ring spinner. And I only got £1 a week, learning, for 4 weeks. And then I eventually became a doffer, and I got £8 a week then. And I was working for £8 a week for about 12 months, and then I eventually became a ring spinner, and I got 15 and 6 a week. That was the highest price. And we used to work from 6 o'clock in the morning till 5:30 at night, and 6 o'clock on Saturdays till 12 o'clock, Saturday dinner time. Anyway, we used to go out at night. I had a friend, and we met these 2 young men, and I liked mine very much, and he liked me. So eventually, we started courting, and this went on for a long time, and I got to know that he was only in lodgings. He had no father and no mother. And he was a very steady young man, very big and fair, and he was all that a young woman had wished to see. He was a lovely man, really good, and he was a member of St. Cross's Church at Clayton. And we eventually made our minds up that we would get married, but we wanted a house. So we saved our money up, which wasn't much. We couldn't save much those days. Anyway, we did save up, and eventually we got a house in Clayton for 3 and 6 months a week. And we got it furnished, and we lived there, and we was very, very happy, because we was very much in love. He thought the world of me, and I thought the world of him. And at times, at nights, when he used to be at home, I used to have a lovely hair at those days, and he used to do my hair up for me, all kinds of styles. And he was a beautiful man, and we worked together, and we paid for our home together, and we was extremely happy. No one was happier, and I was very, very proud of him, especially with him being a member of the St. Cross's Church. And then the war started, and he didn't have any need to go to the war, really. He had no need to go to the war, because his job was painting cars, I believe, but anyway, he was very patriotic. Well, we had a friend over in Canada that had enlisted over there, and he came over here, and he came one night and asked us, would we go to the palace? He'd booked seats for the palace, and would we go? We didn't know what was on, of course, and it was a great treat for us. So we went. When we got there, the palace, everything was lovely. And Vesta Tilly was recruiting, which we never knew till we got there. I wouldn't have gone if I'd have known, of course. Anyway, we got there, and she was recruiting. And she was dressed on the stage beautifully. Beautiful gown, either silver or gold, I'm not quite sure. But it was an evening gown, and then there was all on the stage, the officers and the tables all set out for recruiting. She also had a big Union Jack round her, and she introduced that song, We Don't Want to Lose You, but We Think You Ought to Go, and Ruby Tanya and all those kind of things. And then she came out of the stage and walked all round in the audience, up and down either sides, down the middle, and the young man was getting up out of the theatre and following her back again. And when she got to our stall where we was, she hesitated a bit, and I don't know what happened, but she put her hand on my husband's shoulder. He was on the end seat. She put her hand on his shoulder, and as the men was all following her down, he got up and followed her down too. And they all went on the stage, and they was all recruited, taking the names, and received the King's shilling at that time. And then we came home that night, and I was terribly upset, and I said I didn't want him to go and be a soldier because I didn't want to lose him. I didn't want him to go at all. But he said, we have to go. He said, there has to be men to go and fight for the women. Otherwise, he said, where should we be? And he eventually persuaded me that it was all for the best. And he was only at home about 2 days afterwards, and then he went to Preston. And I broke the house up because I didn't want to be there alone, and went back to live with my mother, because it was near the mill where I worked too. So he went to Preston, and he was at Preston a short time, not very long at Preston, and then he sent me a letter to say he'd heard there was going to be moved to Bournemouth, and did I think I could get to Preston? Well, I had no idea where Preston was then, from where I lived. It seemed miles away, but I eventually made it, and I got to Preston, and just as I'd got to Preston and made inquiries about him, I found out that they'd been moved the day before. Anyway, they was very kind at the barracks at Preston. They made me a cup of tea, and I came back home, heartbroken really, because I hadn't seen him. Later on, he made arrangements, and I made arrangements, and he was moved to Bournemouth. And I went to Bournemouth. And I had a few days with him at Bournemouth, in the billets where he was. There was a lot of soldiers there, a lot of soldiers from Wigan, and they really made me very, very welcome. And we had a glorious time at Bournemouth. And then, when he was coming home from Bournemouth on his last leave before he went overseas. So I came home with him, and we had a few days at home. Not very many days, because they only got 6 days leave that time. So we came home to my mother's, and he stayed home, and then he had to go overseas. And during the time he was a soldier, I got 12 and sixpence a week. 12 and sixpence. That was just the pay. And that was all that I had, beside working, doing that bit of work. So he went overseas, and I never saw him for about 6 months. He said word he was coming home on leave at Christmas. I was expecting him all Christmas. And in the meantime, I'd give the work up at the mill. I'd heard there was a better job at a leatherworks, Noblets Leatherworks at Hornshaw it was. So I went for this job and I got it. And it was a lot more money than I was getting. So I was fully working at Noblets Leatherworks when he came home unexpected in January for his leave. And the morning that I was going out to work, it was Monday morning, and I was ready for going. We set off at 7 o'clock in the morning. We didn't start till 7:45 at Noblets. And I set off at 7 o'clock. There used to be a boy called for me. He would be about 15, that's all, but we used to walk it. And before he came, I was getting ready to go to work. Before this boy came, there was a loud knocking on the door, such a big knocking on the door. And this voice shouted, "Open the door, the Jerrys are here." See? So my mother said, "Oh," she said, "it's Percy, I can tell his voice." And in he came, all mucky and what have you, right from France. He came in, and this boy just followed him in behind him. And he said, "Oh, she's not going to work." He said, "Tell the boss that she's not coming to work while I'm on leave." So I didn't go to work. And I stayed home all the time that he had his leave. But he was very, very filthy and dirty, even lousy. And Mother said, "Oh," she says, "you're not sleeping in my bed like that." She said, "The tub in the back," she says, "and you better get your things off, get them shirts off and whatnot, and throw that down that khaki out, see what I can do with it." There she was brushing down the sides, to see was there anything in, and all the rest of it. And eventually we found some old clothes of his that he had before, and he had a good rest. And then he said to me, during that day, he was tired, and he only got 6 days leave, and he had 2 days travelling out of that. Had to be taken off the 6 days, so he didn't have very long. And he said, now, Kitty, call me Kitty. He says, "Now, Kitty," he says, "what would you like for a present?" "I'm going to buy you a present while I'm home." I said, "Oh, I don't know." I said, but I'm afraid I was rather vain at those days, and I was rather attractive girl. And I said, "I've seen a beautiful hat down the street. Oh, it is a lovely hat." I said, "I would like it." And it was in a shop window, and I looked at this hat several times, and it was a lovely hat, and I'd have loved it. But it was such a terrible dear hat. Them times, that would be 1915, you see. It was 19 and 11 pence. Well, we could get a lovely hat them times for 2 and 11, you see. And he said, "Well, come on." He said, "We'll go down and have a look at it." And I'll never forget that hat. It was white felt, and it turned up all round, with it being dark. And it had a big mauve feather all the way in the brim, and it hung over. Oh, it was gorgeous. So we got dressed up after I got this hat. He bought it me. After we got dressed up, and I took him to the works, Noblets Leatherworks, where I worked. And I introduced him to Mr. Noblet himself. and they all shook hands with him. And how pleased and proud I was when he went in the leatherworks, and everybody could see him. Anyway, he went back about the Thursday night, I should think. No longer than that. I didn't go with him to the tram, because there was trams those days, you know. There was no buses, there was trams. I didn't go with him to the tram. One of my brothers went with him, and a friend of his. And he told his friend, it seems afterwards, he told me, he said, I'm afraid I shall never come back again. Anyway, he went, and I went back to work afterwards, and I worked at Noblet's Leatherworks. And then I found out that I was pregnant. During the time that he was away, I was very, very lonely, as I didn't make friends very easily. And all the thoughts I had was for my husband. And times was very, very hard, and I only had 12 and 6 a week, and therefore I couldn't go out and spend like anyone else. And I used to sit at night and try to do a bit of reading, or a bit of sewing with my hands, to pass the time away like that. But it was very, very hard, and my times would wonder what he was doing, or if he was thinking about me, and wondering how it was going on, when I should see him again, and all things like that. Well, my mother in the meantime had gone to do a little job picking strawberries at a jam factory, and so there was only me in the house, and I carried on, and carried on, and carried on, and then I did a bit more work afterwards. When I found out I was pregnant, I went up to see them at the leatherworks and told them, and he said, we'll find you a light job, Mrs. Morter. They said, come along in and we'll find you a light job. So I went back to work at the Noblet's Leather Factory when I found out I was pregnant, and I worked there till I was 7 months pregnant. And I had a very good job. And then I just gave up work on the Friday night, as I received word on the Monday morning. On the Friday night, I'd just give up work, and I'd gone to bed as usual over the weekend. I didn't go out very much, because I had a very bad time during my pregnancy, and the only thing that I could keep on my stomach was carrots. And they was very, very cheap, and I had £2 of carrots every day. That was the only thing I could eat, was carrots, and I had £2 of carrots every day. Anyway, they suited me, you see, and that was the best thing, and I was only very, very thin at the time. Anyway, I'd settled down, and I'd just give up work. As I say, on the Friday night, I received a letter on the Monday morning. My mother had gone to the jam factory, and she'd left me in bed, because I was getting on then, you see, and she'd left me in bed when I heard the postman come, and I knew that it would be a letter for me. So I ran down in my nightdress and opened the door and snatched the letter off the postman and run in, shut the door, in my nightdress and my bare feet. And I opened the letter, and it was from the sergeant, and it just said, Dear Mrs. Morter, I'm very sorry to tell you of the death of your husband. Well, that was as far as I could read, you see. I couldn't read anything else. So I didn't know just for a few minutes what happened, but I ran out of the house as I was, with bare feet, and I banged on the next door neighbour, and it was a Mr. and Mrs. Hurst, and they let me in, and whatever's to do, she said. And I said, will you read this letter? Mrs. Hurst, read this letter. And she said, oh, she says, you're a poor child. And, of course, I don't know really what happened then, but they brought some blankets and locked me up in them. And they eventually sent word to my mother at the works, and she came home. My mother came home, and they treated me for shock. I had a real shock. But this was only from his sergeant. So I thought, well, perhaps it's just an error. I wasn't sure what had happened. I thought it's perhaps just an error. But later on, I wrote to the sergeant. I wrote and answered his letter. And I found out later on, I had another letter to say that the man that had sent me word had also been killed. And then later on, I had the official news. So after I found that it was officially known that he had been killed, I used to pass my time away trying to make little baby clothes for my baby. And eventually, the baby began to be born. It was born at home, but I don't remember it being born at all. I had a very bad time. I had 2 doctors, and I don't remember the baby being born. And I felt I didn't want to live. I had no wish to live at all, because the world had come to an end. And for me, because I'd lost all that I'd loved, you see, there was no need for me to live, sort of thing. But anyway, the doctors said I had to go away, and they sent me to G Cross Hospital. It was a fever hospital at the time, and I was in there 6 weeks. And then I came back home, and they took my baby with me they took me. And I remember the first time I ever saw the little baby, it was in a little clothes basket, because they had no children's ward there. It was in a little clothes basket, and I thought that never was my baby, because it was such a little tiny thing, just like a rabbit.